If you practice this discipline long enough, people will start to look at you differently. They will say you've changed. They will say you're distant. Some will quietly think you've lost your mind. That is how you know it is working. The samurai never measured discipline by how acceptable it looked to others. They measured it by how uncomfortable it made weak minds. This practice was never meant to be understood from the outside. Extreme discipline always looks irrational to people who live by impulse. You stop reacting. You stop explaining. You stop justifying your choices. And suddenly, you no longer make sense to them. This is not arrogance. It is separation. This is stillness and direction. If you are here to fit in, this channel is not for you. But if you want to develop discipline so precise that it unnerves people around you, stay. And if this way of thinking resonates with you, like the video and subscribe, not for motivation, but to stay aligned when discipline starts isolating you. The samurai trained behaviors that violated social comfort: waking before others, training in silence, refusing distractions everyone else accepted as normal. From the outside, it looked obsessive, unhealthy, extreme. From the inside, it created control. Most men regulate themselves by approval. The samurai rejected this completely. They understood a dangerous truth. If your discipline requires understanding, it is not discipline, it is performance. Extreme discipline creates asymmetry. You do not move when others move. You do not react when others react. You do not seek relief when others seek escape. This makes people uncomfortable. They will ask why you are so rigid, why you are so serious, why you do not relax. What they are really asking is why you no longer obey the same impulses they do. The samurai trained men to accept this isolation early, because discipline that depends on social comfort will collapse the moment comfort demands compromise. This is why the practice looked extreme. It removed explanation from behavior. You did not defend your routine, you executed it. You did not justify your silence, you maintained it. You did not seek agreement, you moved correctly anyway. Modern men fear this stage. They want discipline that improves their life without changing how others see them. That is impossible. Real discipline changes your signal, your posture, your timing, your presence. People sense when you are no longer reactive, when you are no longer available to distraction, when you are no longer negotiating with yourself. And when they cannot control or predict you, they label you: cold, obsessed, detached. The samurai considered this a sign of progress, because a man who is fully governed internally will always look strange to men governed externally. This chapter is only the threshold. The disciplines ahead will show what the samurai actually practiced daily, why it rewired their behavior permanently, and how extreme discipline creates a kind of silence that most men mistake for madness. Because to an undisciplined world, self-control looks like insanity. The reason people think you've lost your mind is because extreme discipline breaks social rhythm. Most men move in sync with the crowd. They wake when others wake. They rest when others rest. They react when others react. This creates comfort. The samurai intentionally destroyed this synchronization, not to be different, but to be independent. Extreme discipline removes you from emotional consensus. You no longer complain when others complain. You no longer indulge when others escape. You no longer panic when others panic. To the undisciplined, this looks unnatural, because most social behavior is driven by shared weakness, shared fatigue, shared excuses, shared distractions. When you stop participating, you disrupt the illusion that these behaviors are normal. People call this obsession. They call it imbalance. They call it unhealthy. What they are really reacting to is the loss of control over you.
The samurai understood this deeply. They trained men to become unavailable to the emotional cycles of others, not rude, not arrogant, unavailable. You did not match energy, you did not mirror moods, you did not absorb tension. This created psychological distance. And distance feels threatening to people who rely on emotional alignment to feel safe. Extreme discipline also removes performative behavior. You stop explaining yourself, you stop announcing goals, you stop seeking validation for effort. From the outside, this looks suspicious. People are used to discipline being loud, public, bragged about. Quiet discipline unsettles them because it offers no reassurance. The samurai trained this silence deliberately. They believed that discipline explained is discipline weakened. Once you justify your routine, you invite negotiation. Once you defend your choices, you give others permission to challenge them. So they removed explanation entirely. They woke, they trained, they worked, they rested. No commentary. This is why the practice looked extreme. It violated social norms that demand emotional transparency. Modern men overshare their inner state. The samurai concealed it. Not to hide weakness, but to prevent interference. Extreme discipline also disrupts emotional pacing. You remain calm when others escalate. You remain steady when others rush. You remain still when others fidget. This makes people uneasy. They expect mirroring. They expect feedback. When it doesn't come, they project meaning onto it. They assume arrogance, detachment, madness. The samurai accepted this misinterpretation because discipline that relies on being understood is fragile. This chapter reveals a hard truth. If your discipline does not alienate you slightly, it is not deep enough. Alignment with everyone else means obedience to the same impulses. Extreme discipline breaks that alignment, not violently, quietly. And once broken, you cannot go back. The next discipline shows what the samurai actually did each day to maintain this separation without becoming rigid or brittle. Because extreme discipline is not about intensity. It is about precision. And precision requires methods most men will never tolerate. The samurai did not rely on motivation to maintain extreme discipline. They relied on ritualized behavior. This is where most men fail to understand the practice. They assume extreme discipline means extreme effort, long hours, constant intensity, relentless pressure. That assumption is wrong. The practice was extreme because it was precise. Every day followed the same structure, not rigid, intentional. The samurai trained at the same time, moved through the same sequences, observed the same rules of conduct, not because they were obsessed with routine, but because routine removes negotiation. Negotiation is where weakness enters. Modern men negotiate constantly. I'll do it later. I'll skip today. I'll adjust this just once. The samurai removed this dialogue entirely. The body moved before the mind could interfere. This is why the practice looked inhuman from the outside. No visible struggle, no hesitation, no emotional display, just execution. Extreme discipline rewires behavior by eliminating choice at the point of action. Choice is where emotion hijacks discipline. The samurai trained beginnings obsessively. The first movement of the day, the first breath before action, the first step into effort. Once the beginning was automatic, the rest followed. This is why their discipline survived fatigue. They did not need to feel ready. Readiness was irrelevant. They moved because movement was the rule. Over time, something irreversible happened. The mind stopped arguing, not because it was convinced, but because it was no longer consulted. This is the moment people describe as losing your mind. From the outside, it looks like blind obedience. From the inside, it feels like freedom. Freedom from inner conflict, freedom from hesitation, freedom from emotional bargaining. Modern men live trapped in internal debate. The samurai escaped it. This is why their behavior appeared extreme. They were not fighting themselves. They had already won. Extreme discipline also rewired perception. When you act without negotiation, time feels different. Effort feels quieter. Resistance feels less personal. Because nothing is being discussed internally, action becomes neutral. This is deeply unsettling to observers. People expect struggle to be visible. They expect complaint. They expect emotional feedback. When it doesn't appear, they assume something is wrong. They assume obsession. They assume detachment. The samurai did not correct them. They knew explanation would weaken the practice. This chapter reveals the core of the method. Extreme discipline is not about pushing harder. It is about removing the voice that wants to stop you, not through force, through structure. Once that voice loses influence, behavior stabilizes. And when behavior stabilizes, identity follows. This is the point of no return, because once discipline becomes automatic, you cannot go back to emotional living. The next discipline shows why the samurai protected this practice fiercely, and what happens if you allow comfort to slowly re-enter. Because extreme discipline is fragile only at one point: complacency. The samurai did not fear hardship. They feared comfort. Because comfort does something subtle and dangerous. It softens standards without announcing it. Most men believe discipline collapses from exhaustion. That is rarely true. It collapses from permission. I've earned a break. This one exception won't matter. I can relax now. This is where extreme discipline dies. The samurai treated comfort as a threat because it reopens negotiation, and negotiation invites emotion back into command. They understood that discipline is not broken suddenly. It erodes. Standards lower slightly. Timing slips. Rituals loosen. Nothing dramatic, nothing alarming, until control is gone. This is why the practice appeared extreme. The samurai did not wait for comfort to become excess. They cut it off at the first sign, not out of hatred for pleasure, but out of respect for precision. Comfort blurs edges. Discipline requires sharpness. The samurai lived by a principle modern men avoid. What feels harmless today becomes weakness tomorrow. Late mornings, unstructured evenings, mindless stimulation. Individually, they seem small. Together, they dismantle discipline. This is why the samurai maintained ritual even when it felt unnecessary, especially when it felt unnecessary, because that feeling was the test. The moment you think discipline is no longer required is the moment it is most at risk. Modern men relax when things improve. The samurai tightened standards, not emotionally, structurally. They did not add intensity, they preserved exactness. Posture remained strict, timing remained fixed, silence remained enforced. This prevented drift. Extreme discipline survives only one way: by refusing to renegotiate. The samurai knew that once you allow comfort to question structure, structure will eventually lose. This is why they appeared rigid to outsiders. They were not rigid, they were protective. Protective of an internal order that took years to build and minutes to destroy. Most men fail here. They build discipline through effort and lose it through ease. The samurai built discipline through structure and protected it through refusal. Refusal to soften, refusal to explain, refusal to adjust for convenience. This chapter reveals why extreme discipline creates such distance from others. because most people organize their lives around comfort. When you don't, your behavior feels alien. They call it obsession. They call it imbalance. The samurai called it survival. The next discipline completes the method. Because even if comfort is controlled, discipline can still collapse if you seek reward from it. And the moment you demand reward, silence and precision begin to crack. The final chapter shows why the samurai removed outcome entirely and how that made their discipline unbreakable.
The final mistake most men make is expecting discipline to give something back. Progress, recognition, a feeling of power, a sense that the sacrifice is worth it. This expectation destroys extreme discipline. The samurai understood this early. The moment you expect reward, discipline becomes a transaction, and transactions invite negotiation. How long do I have to do this? What am I getting out of it? Why am I still living this way? These questions reopen the mind, and once the mind re-enters, discipline weakens. The samurai removed reward entirely. They did not train to feel accomplished. They did not train to feel superior. They did not train for validation. They trained because this is how one lives. Discipline was not a tool. It was a condition. This is why the practice looked extreme. From the outside, it appeared joyless, unbalanced, excessive. From the inside, it was stable. No disappointment, no suffering, just execution. This is the point where people truly think you've lost your mind, because you no longer chase highs, you no longer complain about lows, you no longer signal struggle. You simply continue. To a world addicted to reaction, this looks unnatural. The samurai accepted that, because discipline that seeks approval is already compromised. This chapter reveals the last internal weakness, expectation. Remove it, and discipline has nothing left to negotiate with. The final chapter brings everything together, because extreme discipline is not about isolation, obsession, or denial. It is about becoming so internally governed that nothing outside you can pull you off course. And once that happens, people don't just think you've lost your mind. They realize they no longer have access to it. This is where the practice completes itself. Not when you become productive, not when you become respected, but when nothing outside you can interfere anymore. The samurai never aimed to look disciplined. They aimed to become inaccessible to interference. That is why people think you've lost your mind. You no longer respond on cue. You no longer chase approval. You no longer flinch when others escalate. You are not cold, you are sealed. Extreme discipline reaches its final form when your behavior no longer depends on environment. Praise does nothing. Criticism does nothing. Urgency does nothing. You move when it is correct to move. You stop when it is correct to stop. This is deeply unsettling to people around you, because most people live reactively. They adjust to moods, they mirror energy, they respond emotionally. When you don't, they feel exposed. The samurai accepted this as a side effect. They understood that once discipline is complete, you stop being socially readable. Others cannot predict you, cannot pressure you, cannot pull you into their rhythm. This is what people mistake for madness. In reality, it is internal sovereignty. You are no longer governed by comfort, reward, or reaction. Your standards do not rise with excitement or fall with fatigue. They remain exact. This is why extreme discipline is rare, not because it is difficult to start, but because it is difficult to finish. Finishing means giving up emotional access. No explaining, no defending, no proving. You simply live correctly and allow misunderstanding to exist. The
The samurai believed that a man who needs to be understood is already compromised, because understanding invites influence. Extreme discipline closes that door, quietly. This is why the practice feels isolating, not because you reject others, but because others cannot reach you the same way anymore. You are still present, still functional, still human, but no longer available to chaos. This is the final separation, from reaction, from impulse, from emotional governance. People will continue to label it obsession, rigidity, madness. Let them. The samurai knew that true discipline always looks extreme to those who have never experienced internal order. Because when a man is fully governed from within, the outside world loses its leverage, and a man without leverage over him will always be called something dangerous. Extreme discipline does not make you better than others. It makes you unmovable. And once you reach that state, you do not need to convince anyone of anything. Your presence already answers the question. That is why the practice ends here, not with transformation, not with triumph, but with silence, ordered, exact, permanent. To the undisciplined, it will always look like you've lost your mind. To you, it will feel like you've finally taken it back.